Welcome back to Oxygen Not Included. My name is Nilaus and I will be your guide on this tutorial on how to tame a small volcano, magma volcano. But we're not just taming the volcano, we are also recovering and cooling all of the exported materials, all the igneous rock. We are exporting steam for rockets and we're generating a net power positive loop here. So all of this without very much advanced automation, as you can see, only 3 small things of automation, but we are going to use some pretty advanced setup here for our shipping lanes. And let's see how this is about to erupt. And as it erupts, I will be explaining the overall concept of this this build. Now we are good to go. Let's jump on over and slow it down a bit. I'll be explaining the concept of how this works, and then we're going to go into detail with each of the layers, electricity, pipes, vents, automation, and shipping. All of those will be going into detail, so you know what materials, what values, what settings to get this build. It's not particularly difficult to build in a normal game, but what you need to be aware of is that it's very important that you remember everything, because if you forget it, it's kind of hard to come back and fix it afterwards. All right, so the first thing, how does a minor volcano work? Well, it emits 128 kilograms per second of magma. That is at a quite intimidating 1700 degrees Celsius, and whatever the hell that is in Kelvin, I do not know. What we are going to do here is, you can see, as soon as it hits down here, it will interact with the water. It's very important that the water you have here is less than 600 kilos per tile when you fill it up with water. The reason is 600 kilos per tile here becomes 150 tiles, 150 kilos in each tile. If this gets to higher than 150, then it will reach overpressurize, and if it overpressurizes, then it simply stops emitting, and then you lose both heat and interaction. So what happens now, and this is one of the important things about this design, is that yes, you will need some steel, but you don't need any other fancy materials, but that you will need some steel to get this going. What we're going to see here is that I am picking up on this line, we are having our steel auto sweeper. This will only pick up when the heat sensor is less than 200, because when it's more than 200, then we will actually get too much heat into this room. So let's keep it here. When igneous rock is in this pile such as this, it doesn't actually interact very well with the surroundings. But if you put it into small chunks like we're seeing here, then it will interact much easier with the surrounding, and that's a much better way to dissipate the heat from this little thing into all of this. So what I'm doing is I have a little loop. This is now going into the first, and I think the most complicated loop of this build. We'll get that out of the way and then go back onto this overlay. So what we have is the auto sweeper. If the temperature in the room is less than 200 degrees, it'll pick up, it'll put it in here to the conveyor loader. The conveyor loader will go all the way around and then cover as much ground as possible, interacting with the surrounding, interacting with the temp shift plates in the background. I made those out of iron. You can make them out of whatever materials that is conductive and can handle the heat. What is super important is that this tile, and this tile have to be made out of steel. Otherwise, they will instantly interact when it comes out of here, and it'll just get a little hit of the 1700 degrees hot magma. And there is a chance that if you make it out of iron that melts at 1500 degrees, then it will actually melt, and then the whole thing is broken, and you will just have a bad time. So 3 tiles out of steel, that's 300 steel here. This one we also need to make out of steel. That makes out of steel. This one doesn't make out of steel because we won't have that kind of heat. Here all the rails are just made out of iron ore. That's fine for what we need, but it's just these 3 tiles, and of course the auto sweeper as well as the conveyor loader. Those need to be made out of steel as well. We have other things, but let's continue on this one. So basically what we're seeing here is that the stuff we pick up instantly is 1100 degrees, and as we dissipate here all the way through this area, it just continues to go down, and by the time it gets over here, we got it down to 830 degrees, so it actually let go of 300 degrees of heat into the room. That means it turns it into steam, and that's awesome. Then it goes into this conveyor bridge, and the reason why the conveyor bridge is built exactly like it is because it's made out of iron ore, and iron ore is a very good conductor. It is now a temperature of 200 degrees. So if it was reaching into this cooling chamber here, we have a very cool chamber here, we have a very hot chamber here, and this one we want to keep it as moderate as possible. Over in the cooling chamber, we want to make sure that we do not make a a heat bridge here. So we put it into the middle of the wall so it doesn't work. Now what happens in this wall is that we get the temperature that comes in at 800 degrees, and then it comes in, and then it's all about the cooling here. So now we can let it go again. It cools down to 600 degrees. That's pretty nice, but it's not good enough because we are not going to want to send it out. So that's why I have this conveyor rail thermosensor that says if it is less than 40 degrees, then open the shutoff. Very simple automation. If we open the shutoff, then it exports out and gets back into the infinite storage that we have in a previous video. If not less than 40 degrees, then it sends a red signal and this shutoff is closed, and therefore it goes on a loop. Now you can see the loop is closed and we are unable to get anything more in. All what we have in here will now just sit here and dissipate heat into the steam, which will then be driving the power here. And while we have this loop going around, we will just gradually see that the temperature in this area goes down, and it actually goes down quite a lot faster than I would have initially thought. I thought it would be like running for cycles upon cycles, but it doesn't actually need to do that. It just now it's down to a very I would say modest 300 degrees, but you don't really want your dupes to pick it up, and you certainly don't want it to go on a line through your base and then heat up everything along the way. But you can see that now it starts going down. It's coming down to 180. Just from each iteration back here, it actually dissipates. I think it's about 140 degrees that it dissipates on a full cycle around here. So you can see this is now 160. And if we continue to follow along, we are now starting to see, we'll see a sharp drop as it has sort of done 2 loops through here. Now it's going down to 100. That is working pretty well. And we'll just continue to speed this up as this actually starts exporting here. And we will see, okay, now it's, some of this is 120, but you can, oh, there we go. Now it's down to 65 because it's now done 3 loops in here. And again, nothing happens in this room because we are just exporting. Okay, now we're getting down to 40 degrees, and there comes the first thing. Come on, you should be getting down below 40 now. See, there we go. And we are now slowing it down again. And we have here 23 degrees. How about that? What a lovely temperature that we get our magma igneous rock. In the main room here, we have this location here. This is now sending a red signal. We don't want this to put in more. It still has a lot of stuff in here, but at least we don't want it to get more stuff in here because, we don't want the temperature ideally to be more than 200 degrees, but it's kind of hard to control when you have it as this kind of thing here. What we see now is that then it got another batch in here. So basically all this stuff that is exported will just be replaced by a new batch coming in here. And this is now working at, let's see, now it's already down to 200 degrees. Of course, this will heat up this room. And that's basically the temperature overlay. We want to keep this from overheating. We don't need to keep it cool. I make these deep turbines out of gold just to show that you don't need to make it out of steel because we need to be able to cool this down. We are then working on this one. This is slowly going to heating up, but we also have an active cooling. So that was the rail overlay, or the conveyor overlay, and then we look at the next overlay. That is pretty conveniently. Let's take the power overlay. That's very simple. We hook up the steam turbines or steam engines to the main grid in our power spine. Once we have that heated up, hooked up, then we can just take a single large transformer and then have everything else inserted in here as a single network because it's going to be less than 2000. I make this wire here out of lead because it's in a safe location, but anything going down here has to be made out of iron because it will, if you make it out of lead, then you're going to have a bad time. So as you build this, make absolutely sure you don't accidentally build things out of lead because that will not work. So anything in here, make the wires out of iron. That will make it safe. I'll make this stuff up here out of lead because, well, lead is abundant and I don't want to use my iron for this kind of thing. Let's jump over to the pipe network. So here we have the pipe network. There are 3 things that happen, and the main loop is the cooling loop. This is what you always need to have as when you have steam engines. Pretty much you need an aquatuner to make sure that you have cooling for the aquatuner, for the steam engines, because they will be dissipating a lot of heat here. These are working at a maximum speed, and that's because the temperature that they're getting in is unfortunately a bit over 200 degrees. We'd like to not have it more than 200 degrees, but we can't really control it that finely. So it will dissipate more heat. Anything above 200 degrees steam that goes in will be just dissipated as heat out of this, which means it's generating more heat than it really should. And also we can see that they're starting to turn green instead of blue. I like my steam engines blue if I have a preference. But back to this pipe, what it actually works. First of all, make sure that the aquatuner and the liquid thermal sensor are made out of steel, because they are going to be very, very hot in here. So you need to make sure that they can handle the heat. This loop here, it goes in here, goes on a bypass, then loops over and goes in here. That means if the aquatuner is on, then it will go into the aquatuner and come out here and... Sorry, go into the aquatuner here and come out here, continue on the loop. If this is below 0 degrees, I'm using polluted water because it can go down to minus 19 degrees, so I can cool it further than normal water, and water is just way better than using petroleum for this, and I don't want to use anything more fancy. So I always use basically pea water for the cooling loops, and we can then get it down to, as you can see, coming out here at minus 11 degrees, going through. Of course, insulated pipes, we're going to want to dissipate the heat or heat them up inside our warm room, and then it dissipates out here, getting some heat transferred into the steam turbines to cool them down. It doesn't actually dissipate, well, it does dissipate some heat, and then in here to dissipate as much heat as possible into the cool room, so we keep that cool, and we can then get, you can see here, keep cooling down the igneous rock as well. Back here, and then it sort of continues this loop. Just feed it once and then forget about it. The steam turbines will output 95 degree hot water, and that will just be let back in here, dropping it down, and then it's going to be just fine. The last loop is on how to export, how to top up more water into the steam room, and how to export it as well. Because as I said, we are not only taming the volcano, we are also getting power, as you can see, quite a lot more power than it's actually consuming, so that's great. We are also exporting rocks, as we can see here. Exporting rocks, and on top of that, the coolest thing, and the reason why I actually enabled this, was because I wanted steam engine or steam for my steam engines. So if we just go all the way up to my rocket here, we will have a steam engine, or steam rocket engine here. It can take 150 kilos in spaced out DLC. Then it could take 900 in the default game. That threw me off a bit, but let's say it is 150. Now what you don't want to do is have this pipe full of steam, and because even if I'm using ceramic pipes here, and that's a really good insulator, then over time it will still cool down a bit. It dissipates heat to the surroundings, and it risks changing the shape. Plus, every time you sort of have to punch through this one for whatever reason, you have hot steam and coming out of this. So we don't want to have anything on the pipe at any given, except when we are transferring. So for that reason, we have installed it like this. I have built a steel pump and a steel meter in here. There are no automation, because the automation is handled by the meter itself. If we go click on the meter, then it says export 0 amount. And if I change this to say I want a full rocket, 150, and as soon as I hit enter, then it allows the steam to go out here into my ceramic pipes, and it starts pumping the steam out of this room. This steam will always be, well, in this case it's 200 degrees. That's nice and hot and good for our rocket. We could also wait, even if this is completely idle as it is now, and it's going to be erupting in 13 cycles. This will not turn back into water from the cooling. It'll remain between 100 and 120 degrees at some point here. What we are seeing here, but this will ensure that, where are we? Here, the meter. Once it gets to 150, it'll simply stop pumping anything out, and that means we will have an empty pipe later on. We'll just come back to look at that. Now, of course, if we are exporting steam out of this room every time we want to launch a rocket, we're going to have a way to put more steam into the room, or more accurately, put more water into the room. So we built exactly the same up here. We have our water meter on this pipe, and basically what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm just going to say, hey, top up with another 150 kilos of water. Then it'll start pumping in the water. This water will of course be pumping in a bit faster, because it comes in at 10 kilos per blob, while the other one is only going out at 500 grams per blob. That's why I started this one first. But it's coming up at, let's have a look, it's only 80 kilos, so we'll wait until this one is fully saturated. What we're seeing though is still, we are a bit more than 200 degrees. That means this one is idling. We have at this point nothing on the transport lanes. That is really nice, and that means we have the rest of our heat basically stored in here. 1100 kilos of 1100 degrees 5.1 tons. That doesn't really interact very well with the surroundings. So when it works here, now it drops below 200, as you can see, because the steam engine keeps working. As it drops below, then it starts exporting more in here. Of course, it'll also fill up this one, and then we will see that the temperature starts increasing, and then we have the shut off the thermal sensor. Shut off the thermal sensor here, and because it's now over 200 degrees, this will go in here and start dissipating more heat, increasing the temperature above 200 degrees, and until we can see that the sun is now empty and it just gets stuck. So this one will now dissipate heat while this one is cooling down to a modest temperature, and then it'll basically be stuck here until all of this temperature that is stored on the conveyor has been dissipated into the steam. We can see that the temperature goes up. We could probably set it to maybe like 190, because as soon as it triggers, it actually just gets a little boost upwards. So we can set it to 190 so it doesn't overheat above. I mean, it's not overheating, but getting us above the 200 degrees. And now we have, again, steam turbines are continuing to run at maximum rate, completely unsupervised. All we need to do, this one is, come on, the gas valve, where are you? There, 150 degrees, or 150 kilos. We have sent it out on the pipe, and it'll then feed into our steam engine rocket. But once it does that, we have a nice empty pipe, which means that if we need to cut it at some point, we're not going to have steam rolling all over the place. So that is basically, in terms of automation, we just summarize this. We have the 3 automation parts. This is the export of when to send it out of our cooling loop. I set it to 40 degrees. This ingredients in here don't need to be particularly effective. I have built them out of iron here, and I built this out of steel. It's not really necessary because it's not going to be that hot, but it's just, I had enough steel. Steel and iron is basically the same for me. The second automation here is the thermal sensor. I set this to being active when it's above 0 degrees, so that it cools down to minus 14 degrees when it comes out, because it takes 14 degrees out of the water here. And the third automation is just to make sure that we don't add more heating in terms of igneous rock on the belt when we don't need to do that. You can see here, it'll just slowly dissipate while the temperature is still running around over at a bit more than 200 degrees. Once that is now empty, you can see that we now empty basically here. That means now we're not really adding more temperature into this room from the small blocks of igneous rock, and therefore the thermal sensor will gradually, if I can just click the damn thermal sensor, here we go, it will gradually start decreasing until we get to the value 190, which is kind of where we think that is a good idea. That means gradually, as this one is on its down cycle, we will be exporting the igneous rock into this loop, cooling it down, getting it back, and making it into building materials, or feeding it to hatches, so we can get more eggs, so we can get more lime, so we can get more steel, so we can build more cool things like this. And as this has been running pretty consistently for an entire cycle, it's basically gotten rid of all the igneous rock while I've been chatting away. We can see that the heating up here is not very bad. We are running this at 25 degrees, 26 degrees for the steam turbines. We are not in any kind of worry when we are running with 26 kilos in steam turbines. You can see here now the whole thing is empty. This loop is cool. This part is cool, and our temperature here is just gradually, it's remaining pretty constant, and now it's just producing power. Of course, the aquatuner is also working, so we have to deduct the aquatuner, but you know, in the grand scheme of things, this is 1700 and this is 1200. All the rest of it is kind of idle most of the time, so we're basically getting a net 500 kilowatts of power out of this. But again, we're not doing this for the power, we are doing it basically free materials and the capability to export steam at any given time. I think that was basically all I wanted to show with this build. It is completely self-contained, it's completely self-reliant, no interaction whatsoever for anything here, and you can just leave it as it is, and then it will just basically provide you with power, with steam and when you need it, and also with a bit of igneous rock as a nice bonus as well. So if you have enjoyed this, if you found it useful, be sure to hit the like button and consider subscribing for more, hopefully, awesome guides on cool designs in Oxygen Not Included. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, take care, and as always, stay effective.